Hi, I'm Jeannie Greenberg-Rowatin, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this conversation with Jan and Ronnie Greenberg. Although happy to give my own perspective of my parents, it is my great pleasure to introduce colleague and great friend, Amy Capilazzo. She will be responsible for assuring a few family secrets, although I must admit, right now I wish I had those Dan Flavin love letters to my mother. Among us dealers, certain tricks and habits are passed down. When entering a room hung with art, whether it be a museum, a collector's home, or even a children's art show, we use our bird's eye precision to mark which artwork we might like to sell and for how much. Pricing a work of art is a skill. We read museum labels from bottom up, checking first the names of the collectors who own the work on the wall. Amy is one of us. When a painting comes to her, she looks at the provenance to discover who originally sold the work. I know this firsthand. Recently, a work came in privately to her, and she noted that my father had originally sold the work. Not surprisingly, she offered the masterpiece back to my father. Amy's path to her position as chairman of Sotheby's Fine Arts Division came with a defining stint at Sotheby's arch rival, Christie's. Over 13 years, she rose to be its chairman of post-war and contemporary art. During her tenure there, it was her infectious energy and her unconventional thinking that game-changed and made her the global face of contemporary art. When she left her post to strike out on her own, the art world took notice. She formed art agency partners with Alan Schwartzman and Adam Chin, filling what they saw as a significant need for a client-oriented combination of industry knowledge, financial sophistication, and discretion. It was a successful formula, and it catalyzed a paradigm shift in the market. In January of 2016, Sotheby's acquired Art Agency Partners for some groundbreaking $50 million plus deal. She is the mother of two, and like me, just turned 50. She is my kin. Amy adds a bit of old-fashioned Mae West glamour to the art world, and she knows how to turn a phrase. Recently, she described the Ames collection that brought over $63 million to Sotheby's as visually promiscuous. Before turning over the microphone to Amy, I'd like to thank Toby Devin Lewis, the presenting sponsor, and others who make possible this event, including National Council sponsors, corporate and media partners, and all of you who support the ranch. I would especially like to thank Nancy Willems for allowing me to share the stage with my parents. And now, Amy, let the conversation begin.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for including me, for having me. I'm honored to be here. I feel like a member of the Greenberg family a little bit because Jeannie is such a very good close friend. And I was thinking about the multi-generational approach in the art world that the Greenbergs have. And Coco, I'm looking at you, baby, because like, it would be Ronnie's a middle child, Jeannie's the middle child, and Coco's the middle child.
Oh, that's true.
So it's maybe the legacy of the middle child to be in the art world. I'm actually the youngest, but that's okay. Well, to really understand how amazing the Greenbergs are, you have to go back to the year 1972. Nixon is president, the country's gripped with the Watergate scandal, there's the terrorist attacks at the Munich Olympics, the withdrawal of the last troops from American troops from Vietnam, the galvanizing of the Equal Rights Amendment, and of course, Shirley Chisholm's campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. It is also the year that Ronnie Greenberg and his wife Jan and their three lovely little girls began a lifelong journey into the world of contemporary art without looking back. Ronnie began his career in the family real estate business and decided a worthy detour would be to open an art gallery in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank God for us that he liked art more than golf or cigars. In this journey, he shaped the landscape for collectors to gain access to the East and West Coast's best and brightest artists, from pop to minimalism, from process-oriented works to large-scale sculpture, and as a result, left a legacy of the best American taste and exceptional provenance. Safe to say, the Midwest was forever transformed. Like most art addicts, his journey into art began with buying his first work of art in the early 1960s. He was a serviceman stationed outside of Paris and wandered into the Maurice Coveau Art Gallery and bought a Picasso linoleum cut. This experience, and probably a pep talk from Leo Castelli, set the stage to transform it all. The rest is history. For Jan, the calling into the art world involved education and reaching young audiences about art and artists. She became an esteemed young person's author of books on such artists as Jackson Pollock, Chuck Close, Louise Bourgeois, and Cindy Sherman, among others. When I think about Ronnie and Jan, I think about the famous Gilbert and George quote, and I quote, "To live with art is all we ask." That was a 1970 project that Gilbert and George did, performance, and a quote that is iterated throughout time to talk about that really completely defines your life for me, which is a full, immersive, fully informed 360 life in the arts. Inspiration comes in so many forms, and I thought I would sort of structure this talk because the Greenbergs could tell stories about artists. Like, we could just like riff off here for hours and days with so many amazing tales. And I thought, you know, the number of artists that the Greenberg Gallery showed over the years is so remarkable and so amazing. I thought I would just pick a couple of artists that were really key to defining the legacy of probably of your lives and experiences, and also the gallery, and also Jeannie to Next Generation Gallery, and sort of give a quote by the artist, and then have you sort of address your experience with the artist, what you thought about them, what they were like, you know. So I would like to start with Donald Judd, because the gallery begins in 1972, and in December of 1972, Ronnie and Jan do a show with Don Judd. And here is Don Judd's quote: "Any combining, mixing, adding, diluting, exploiting, vulgarizing, or popularizing of abstract art deprives art of its essence and depraves the artist's artistic consciousness. Art is free, but it is not a free-for-all."
Great quote.
I know. What about Don? He was
Great
such
quote.
a rigorous bastard, really. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Don.
All right. Well, Don Judd was a good friend of mine, and he was a great personality. First, I'm going to tell you a story about Don, because Don was a really peculiar man. So Don loved everything that was very slick, very rectilinear. He was an interesting man who also liked cars, but he liked a Range Rover. So he used to go from New York to St. Louis, and this was almost before he went to Marfa. It was one of his first trips down. So he had Abercrombie and Fitch obviously do the entire Range Rover. But Don forgets to buy air conditioning.
Well, it was all stainless steel.
The whole thing is stainless steel.
Traveled
sun
with the
is
two little
reflected.
children across the country.
And so he comes into St. Louis, and I've never seen anybody. His wife, we ended up putting on an airplane going to, I think, someplace in Texas at that time. But in any case, that was Don. Don stayed with us for a few days. He always did. And as a matter of fact, he's always been one of my favorite artists. I can even tell you a little bit more history about it that I just thought of. One day, I get a call from Leo Castelli, and Leo was paying him $2,000 a month as a stipend. And Don Judd was selling very, very little. I mean, when you think about early 70s, or even, the early 70s, Don was making, as you know, all of these things that were not handmade, but were made in a factory. So Leo calls up and he says, Ronnie, he says, you're good friends with Don. He says, I want you to do something. He says, I've always thought of you to bring you closer to me. So he says, from now on, I want you to pay him $1,000 a month, and I'll pay him $1,000 a month. And he says, and you're in charge of going around and selling his work. So, and I did. I went to all of the museums around the Midwest. And I'll tell you a little bit about Leo a little later, but in any case, that was the story.
Well, to segue into something that will involve Jan most certainly, including love letters, we've learned. I have this quote from Dan Flavin, who showed at the Greenberg Gallery in 1974 and was so enamored with Ronnie and Jan that he made a work entitled To Jan and Ron Greenberg from 1972-73. Here's his quote. It is what it is, and it ain't nothing else.
Yeah, right.
Everything is clearly, openly, plainly delivered.
And I can only respond to that. You have to know what he looked like. Bib overalls, first of all. A nice stomach that protruded out maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet. But a terrific guy, and he loved to write letters. And guess who he wrote them to?
Well, I remember that he stayed with us for 3 weeks. I think he was having a show at the museum, and I think you had something
gallery.
at the gallery also. And every night he went to a particular restaurant in town. And the last night he was in St. Louis, he had a big party.
Right.
And about a week later, we got the bill.
Yeah, right.
For all three.
It was a good thing.
He loved wine, he loved food, he loved women. And when he started writing me these letters, and they were really interesting because he had beautiful handwriting, and he wrote about his father dying, and he found his father had never complimented him. And he was a great artist. You know, by that time, in the 70s, he was well known everywhere. His father died, never having come to an opening or anything, but he found a box filled with all of Dan's announcements, press releases, and articles. So that was kind of a poignant note.
Right.
But I just didn't have time to answer all the letters, and I was busy with the children, with working, with everything. And lo and behold, I would get the same letter back in the same handwriting. And I found out years later from the archives that every single letter he wrote anybody, from the beginning of his art world career, he copied. So they're now all, they'll probably be published one day.
It's the equivalent of a selfie, right? Like sort of self-obsessed, really. Wow, that's amazing. Well, okay, we'll move on to someone who I know played a big role in your lives personally and professionally, and someone who was a mainstay of the Greenberg Gallery and probably showed at least a dozen times over the years, Roy Lichtenstein. So I have 3 quotes from him, because Roy was actually, when you look at how artists talk about their own work, or how they are interviewed, or how they're quoted for catalogs, etc., Roy is among the sparest, even sparer than Dan Flavin at times. He writes, "I'd like to pretend that my art has nothing to do with me." It's actually a very Andy Warholish kind of quote.
True.
Art doesn't transform, it just plain forms. But this is my very favorite. I don't have big anxieties. I wish I did. I'd be much more interesting.
Well, I can take it from there. First of all, you have to realize this was the nicest guy as far as all artists are concerned.
Wait a minute. You're the nicest guy.
No. Well, I'm not an
Agreed.
artist.
We have consensus that Ronnie Greenberg was a nice guy.
We'll get that out of the way. But Roy was just spectacular. One of my first shows was with him. And I can only remember that the prices on them were then like $5,000 to $15,000 for the biggest one. They were all paintings. And believe it or not, the art world was so small in those days, they were not that easy to sell. But we did sell them all, and I did several
What
other
series
shows.
was it?
Those was 72.
Modern picture.
Yeah. These were, by the way, these were the first pictures that he did without dots.
Right.
So it goes way back.
Sort of looked like some of them Dutch still lives. You know, he was always appropriating
Yeah, that's true.
from the history.
Yeah. The first painting he did, which is one that we still have, which I bought actually before the show, was Bananas and Grapefruit. It was like a cock and balls. And it was maybe 3 foot by 4 foot.
Good for the girls, the 3 daughters in the dining room, I guess.
Oh, of
right?
course. No, you didn't.
No.
Anyway, Roy was a pleasure to deal with. He was in Southampton, and I used to go out there. He also had a studio down on the lower west side. It was just a wonderful man to be with. So I can tell you other stories about
when he
it.
came to St. Louis, there was I don't know if it was a retrospective, but a big show of his work at the St. Louis Art Museum, and we were asked to do the party afterwards, the dinner, and we had this rather rambunctious bulldog named Jasper Johns.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget Dorothy Lichtenstein about to put food on the tray, on her plate, and the bulldog making a lunge for it and chasing her around the table. And I thought, they'll never come back to St. Louis again.
We had a lot of fun in those days, but go ahead.
So from Flavin, Judd, and Roy were all artists you shared with Leo in those years.
Yeah, well, let me go back and tell you about Leo. Leo was one of the innovators of our time, and not many people know about this. But Leo, after abstract expressionism, he was the main gallerist. He had all of the great artists. He had Roy Lichtenstein, he had Andy Warhol, he had Robert Rauschenberg, he had Jasper Johns, he had Oldenburg. I mean, I could go on and on about these artists that he had. And what he did is he figured out very early that all of the buyers were not just in New York. So what he did is he made a system by asking dealers in other cities. So what he had is he had a dealer like in L.A., Margot Levin. He had one in Boston. He had one in Miami. He had one in, he had me in the Midwest. He had one in San Francisco. And what he did is he didn't really advertise this, and not many people knew about it, but they were all close to him. And since he had the best artists, or some of the best artists at that time, he would just, you could always have access to him. And so it was always fun to go in there, to have lunch with him, to do everything. And I became very friendly with some of the other people in that aura.
That's like, can you imagine that was like a very simpler distribution system? We're in a much more complex,
Yeah,
nuanced
but that was like
distribution
the
system.
first, it was almost like a franchise, but it was not a franchise per se.
Right, I mean,
And not a lot of people ever knew about that.
well, you basically had a product not many people wanted to buy, so you were, it was a
That's
limited sort of, it was a,
But Amy and everyone, a lot of friends are here that come from remember those days very well. There were just a few galleries to go to in New York. For
That's
a
true.
very, very small amount of artists and a really small amount of collectors.
Smaller.
And we all knew each other, and we were quite young then. And so it was a very, I would say, heady world for us to meet collectors all over the country, just a few who would welcome us in, and we could look at the art that they were buying. We could go to a few galleries and always be welcomed in. And I've heard people who, in the last 10 years, saying, well, I can't go in that gallery. I can't go in that gallery. They don't pay any attention to me. Yeah. But in those days, they were so welcoming, and we learned so much. I do have to do a shout out for Emily Rao Pulitzer, who came from the Fog to be the only curator at the St. Louis Art Museum in the 60s. And she had an interest in contemporary art and did shows of contemporary artists. That's where we first saw a lot of the work that we later became involved with. And she sent us to New York to 3 or 4 different galleries. And we were young, Leo said, well, just buy this set of prints. He had had his 10th anniversary, and all the artists in his stable had done multiples.
Yeah.
He said, buy it, take it home, hang it on the wall, and see what you like. And that was sort of the beginning for us.
It was very interesting. We became very good friends with Emmy. And Emmy Rao ended up marrying Joe Pulitzer, who is also a mentor of ours and a really good friend. And we traveled with him all over the world, really. But what was so interesting to me was this one experience. Emmy had singled out Frank Stella. Frank Stella turned out to be a really good friend during the same time. I started buying his work, and then all of a sudden, a great painting became available. It was owned by Frank's father. It was Marriage of Reason and Squalor, number 1, which is the mate to the one at the Museum of Modern Art. And I found somebody else who would pay half of it at that time. So the two of us bought the painting. And I remember exactly what it was. It was $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And then because of
Is it a full-size study to the one at MoMA?
it's the exact same size.
Like, exact
the
same
only difference is, if you know the two paintings, they're both have a lot of rectilinear lines on them. And the lines are really the raw canvas. The one that the modern has ends up like this, and the one at St. Louis ends up with like this. So it's all the same. But anyway, we ended up buying it, and of course, for Emmy, she wanted it at the museum, so we both decided we gave it to the museum for our costs to them.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, there was a gallery in New York a year, maybe 2 years ago, Bob Mnuchin. And Robert did a show of those. And he said, if you can get that away from the St. Louis Museum, I said, there's no way. He said that painting was worth an awful lot of money.
Right. I was just doing the internal rate of return, because if you bought, I'm guessing it was like the early 70s when this happened.
It was.
Okay, so if you bought it in 72, let's say for $20,000, who has the mathematical mind or the calculator? And you compared it, let's put a kind of, round number of, say, 40 or $50 million on today's value for that painting is what I would put it. But let's say 40 to be conservative. That would be...
it's a lot.
Yeah, that's a pretty good internal rate of return from 20K, so, yeah. So it would be, like if you put, so it would be from 1972 until...
It was actually before that. It was 1969.
It was 69, so it would be 1969 to 2017, $20,000 compounded for $40 million value today. Like that's, I'm actually probably being slightly conservative because it'd be such a rare thing that you would even be able to have such a thing, but that would be, there was another black painting on the market for $35 million that didn't really sell, that wasn't that caliber, wasn't that good, so.
But those kind of paintings should be in museums.
They should be, but look at, this
Really?
is the, guys, look at, he gave it to the St. Louis Art Museum. That's your insured legacy.
And so we want to invite all of you to come to St. Louis, to see the St. Louis Art Museum, to see Emmy Pulitzer's foundation, and also the Museum of Contemporary Art.
Yeah.
There's art there.
Superb collection.
To see in this
St. Louis.
wonderful city that I used to tell people at parties in New York, they'd say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say St. Louis, and their eyes would sort of glaze over a little bit. But it's a wonderful place to visit, and
well, what I would say,
we'll welcome you in.
We should all go to St. Louis. We should have a party afterward and then send the bill to the Greenberg. So, in the spirit of what happens in St. Louis.
With Flavin, right.
Exactly.
Well, I have to correct you on that. I had a show of Dan's. Jan came in town, and he said he would stay for 3 or 4 days, and as Jan said, he stayed for weeks and weeks and weeks. And he sent me these bills, but I ended up selling the show that he did at my gallery, and I deducted all of his parties
You did
from
not.
that. Of course I did.
That's good. Excellent. 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 And he just continued to send love letters to your
Yeah,
wife.
right,
so
of course.
it was a complex relationship.
I was so glad when he got married.
Right.
Oh, God.
Right. So is Ronnie, really. I'd like to move on to another artist because this is an artist that had shown at the Greenberg Gallery and also was the subject of one of your books, Jan, and it's Chuck Close, and your book was entitled Chuck Close, Up Close. Believe it or not, I actually had to type that to get the joke. I was sort of slow on the take for that one. The advice, and this is Chuck's quote, "The advice I'd like to give young artists, or really anybody who'll listen to me, is not to wait for inspiration. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. If you wait around for the clouds to part or a bolt of lightning to strike you in the brain, you are not going to make an awful lot of work. All the best ideas come out of process. They come out of the work itself."
When I decided with my writing partner, Sandra Jordan, that we wanted to do the first book about an individual artist, we'd written 3 books about art, looking at painting, looking at sculpture, and then some essays on American artists in the 20th century. We had to agree that it would be an artist that we both admired, that we both felt was significant, and you're going to spend a year researching and talking to this person. It had to be someone we respected hugely. And I wrote, actually Pace helped introduce him, and we wrote a letter. He said, "Why do you want to write about me?" And I wrote back and said, "I think you're a hero. And I think that young people would really like to know your story." I mean, he probably had some attention deficit disorder, which correlates with a number of artists that we've written about. Robert Rauschenberg, for example, even Motherwell. So I'm sure Andy Warhol did too, but anyway, I'm not sure of it completely, but. And he wrote back and said, "If you want to say I'm a hero, you can't write this book." So he never mentioned that, but we told his story, which was so poignant. I mean, he grew up in, I think it was Tacoma, Washington, and he couldn't remember. He would sit in a bathtub before a test in cold, cold water with a board across the tub, and he'd line by line, word by word, try and memorize for the test the next day. He would go the next morning, and if the test was canceled or delayed, he couldn't remember anything. So when I think about his work, think about it. Piece by piece by piece, copied from an enlarged Polaroid. All of his friends. He was not interested in doing portraits of famous politicians or royalty or aristocratic, rich, people all over the world. He was interested in doing portraits of his friends and his family. A lot of his friends were great artists. Phil Glass is one of the great portraits. And he was so welcoming to us. We had many conversations with him at his studio, and that was the first book. We were so interested in what art meant to him. And he said, "I want kids to know that art saved my life."
Wow, beautiful. It wouldn't be complete if we didn't have a little chat about Andy Warhol. I actually want to talk about John Chamberlain for a minute as well. So maybe I'll talk about John Chamberlain first, actually.
All right.
John has a very good quote as well. He says, "Art is a liaison between some sort of deranged mentality and others who are not going through it today." So,
All right, you have to know what he looked like. He had a tattoo on every finger, and he was a guy.
before they were fashionable people.
But does everybody know what kind of art he does?
Yeah.
I mean, he does
Crushed
crushed cars, is what he does. And so I went to his studio one time, and I always liked his work. And he had a lot of work. So I arranged to have him do a show at the Missouri Botanical Garden. And we had two newspapers in St. Louis at that time. One was the Post-Dispatch with the Pulitzer Zone, and the other one was the Globe Democrat, which was out of New York. That's all I'll say about it. So anyway, we did this. Peter Raven was the head of it. He was a friend of ours. And I said, this is going to be very controversial if you'll let me do it. But I said, I want to have these pieces all over the botanical garden.
The manicured grounds of the
And
botanical
I mean,
garden.
yeah, you can't believe it. It's one
I'm
of
going to
I-
guess the Board of Trustees at the Missouri Botanical Garden were conservative people.
Oh, my God.
Threatened to quit.
But in any case, we got it approved, and John brought these pieces in two flatbed trucks, one of which he drove, and the other one somebody else drove. And at the time, some of these pieces come apart with the welds. So he welded them all himself there, and he put it all over. So the newspapers got a hold of this, and the Globe Democrat called it, this was an upsetting field because they thought this was, as they put it, dinosaur droppings. And it was, and then the letters started coming in. Well, Peter Raven told me they have never had so many people come to the botanical gardens in their life. And and we had to extend the show for like another couple of months. It was that big of a show.
That's fantastic. Another artist you showed over and over throughout the years, and I remember handling the sale of something you used to own personally that you had sold to Monsieur Pinault that we were then selling at Christie's. I remember it's a 72-inch, 1967 Warhol self-portrait,
Right,
the big
this one,
72-inch size where
yeah.
he's got this position. Blue-green color. Like I remember every
Fabulous
inch of that painting.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, to have had this painting is like, maybe it's enough. I'd like to still have it today, but
Yeah, of course.
maybe we don't really own anything. We're just like foster parents
No,
for a while. But
that's the way I feel about
Custodians.
it.
but
That's
this
right.
it would be fitting to talk about this quote, in particularly I think of, it's hard to imagine the American landscape where the regions of America played such a, what would today be perceived as sort of an outsized role in making the legacy of American art, like St. Louis, Carl Solway in Cincinnati, like all these smaller dealers in various regions, actually had the Loxley Shea years in Minneapolis. Like there were just
That's right.
amazing exhibitions happening throughout America. But I like this quote because he's, of course, everyone knows Andy's most famous quote, in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. That's the exact quote, 1968, Stockholm, the Moderna Museet, where he says this quote. I think Pontus Hultén is who he's talking to. And then in 1979, he says, and these would be the years you would have been working with Andy very actively, he says, in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, but I'm bored with that line.
Yeah, right. They
I
did
never
say
use
that.
it anymore. My new line is, in 15 minutes, everyone will be famous.
Right. And that was a great line.
So in a way, his own frustration with people sort of embedding him with his 60s legacy, he wanted to really move on.
He did.
And I really personally think the most interesting years for Warhol are, once you know his whole career, are really the 70s, because he has the 60s, he makes all this great work.
And
He
then
gets shot by Valerie Solanas in
Right,
68.
exactly.
He takes years to actually physically recover. He gets, in 1971, leading up to the election of Nixon, he does the very famous campaign poster that says "Vote McGovern," and it's
Right.
a lousy picture of Nixon looking like a devil and the tyrant. And he proceeds to get audited by the IRS every single year of his
Oh
life
my
after he makes that poster.
Yeah.
And
right.
he's haunted, he feels tormented. But in the 70s, he goes very deep into his work, and sort of just as painting is kind of declared dead by the New York critics, he starts painting with
Really painting.
florid brushwork, and it's no longer the flat silk screens of the 60s. It's really like thick appliques of paint when you think of the Mao series or the Hammer Sickles or
All of them.
all that work.
And don't forget the fright wigs.
Fright
which
wigs.
came after that.
Did you
And-
do a fright wig show?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, fantastic.
yeah.
That's may he rest in peace. That was his last body of work.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
talk a little bit about Andy and I know he spent a fair amount of time and passed through St. Louis many times in his career.
Well, Andy, go ahead. You
Just a
talk about it.
quick anecdote. Ronnie did a show of his myth series in 1975. And Andy came to St. Louis with his entourage. Fred Hughes came, Bob Colacello came,
Right.
and he always was accompanied by some British royal sort of person.
Some fallen aristocrat who was wanting
Had
to
to be a woman, though.
Yeah, but he always had an entourage. And he came to St. Louis because that was the year his first book came out, Andy Warhol.
From A to B.
From
Or
A to Z.
C to
Right.
Z or whatever. And
Exactly.
he had done an autographing in the windows of one of the department stores.
Yeah, for-
And so Ronnie organized the show in conjunction with Andy coming to St. Louis for an autographing. Anyway, we invited 90 people to a party at our house after the opening, and 130 showed up. It was quite unbelievable. And he liked to hang his pictures, all of you know this, you've seen shows, on wallpaper that he designed. And so he sent us rolls and rolls of the purple Mao heads.
Wonderful.
And we had some left over. So I called the factory and to talk to Andy, and I said, do you think I could use the extra rolls in my guest bathroom in St. Louis? And he said, wow, yeah, sure.
Wow.
And I said, oh. And so I did, and it's still up all these years
Yeah, right.
later. And I can't sell my old house because I don't know how to get the wallpaper to come with me.
I would just like to say the last time I was in St. Louis, I made sure I had to pee in that guest room. And when we have our party there, I recommend everyone partake and enjoy the scene.
Okay, over to you.
Well, Andy was a very interesting guy. After he got shot, he asked me to come and be part of his entourage because he wanted people around him that he knew so that they would protect him. Because by this time, he was really getting famous. And I did that a couple of times. But the thing that I was thinking about Andy was he always had a camera around his neck, and he would take pictures. But there was never any film in the camera. But he used it as an excuse because he didn't want to talk to people. He was very, very much of an
He
introvert.
was shy.
And he's very shy. Anyway,
Amazing. Well, I feel like this is probably a very apt time to turn it over to the audience for questions. This is sort of an open forum, and you know the Greenbergs are fabulously generous and open people. So if anyone has questions or wants to ask a story, you know, Eleanor.
So with all your shows, did you buy one work from each of them?
well, when we started out, we really had very little money. And I'll go back. I'll tell you, the first painting we ever bought, in reality, not from Leo, but from another person, was from Andre Emmerich, and it was a veil by Morris Lewis. And at the time, I think I was making $10,000, $12,000 a year, and that was the price of the painting. And I paid it off over 2 years. So, you know, things just evolved. And you did what you felt like doing.
He's being too modest. He would always wait until people bought out of the show, and if there was something left, he
Oh,
would
yeah,
buy a
well.
painting or a sculpture. Really, that's true.
Well,
Go
that's
ahead.
smart.
So of the works that you have, which is the oldest that's still in your collection?
Well, I still have the Morris Lewis. Okay, so that was bought in, it's a 1958 painting, and
No,
I probably
70.
bought it in 1972, or, no, I think even
Do you have the
before.
lino cut from Maurice Cova Gallery?
No, but that's got an interesting story, too. I bought that while I was in the service. I had no money. But as a news correspondent, you got a little hit of money every once in a while. It was $500. And I paid that for the lino cut. And then I'll never forget, there was a very good dealer in Minneapolis, John Stoller, at Dayton's Gallery 12.
Uh-huh.
They got in a great Ellsworth Kelly, blue and red, and it was supposed to go to Emmy Rao's mother at the time, and it didn't fit. It was too big. It was about, I guess it's 8 or 9 feet tall. So the woman that was in charge of the gallery calls me up, and she said, I have somebody for a lino cut. So I literally traded the line of
Oh my God, what a great
for
trade.
that painting. And I still have that painting as well.
That's a great trade. That's an excellent trade.
Yeah.
When does the Greenberg autobiography come out?
Never. Not unless Jan writes it.
We're really focusing on the movie rights following that. Andrea?
I have a two-part question for you. What is your single biggest like and dislike of the art gallery landscape as it stands now compared to when you were in your prime? And then exactly. Secondly, what would your advice be if you had to give one piece of advice to a new collector? What would that be? Those are my two questions.
All right. Well, I think I'll answer the latter question first. I've always told anybody that came in the gallery that never bought a painting, I try to give them a book and let them go through it, and not to look at the names, but just to fold over and just tell me what really hit them and what they really liked. And then I said, look, what you should do is, if it was abstract painting or if it was realism or whatever it was, I would say, I would offer certain paintings by that artist or a similar artist. And I'd say, look, what you have to do is jump in with both feet. And nowadays it would be a drawing. In those days it was sometimes a painting. But I think you really have to live with a painting. Live with it. The more you live with it, the better it becomes. And the more you have a chance to look at it and find things different about it every time you look at it. It'll give you more pleasure than you give it. I promise you that. The other point is, it reminded me of a story that I have to tell you. This was an 80s artist. And he was a younger artist at that time. Now he's not so young anymore. But I had set up for him to give a talk at the St. Louis Museum. And everything was fine, and we had a cocktail party before him at the house. And I did not realize it, but he got really smashed. And he got up, and I'll preface it by saying that I had a half a dozen paintings at the gallery of his. And these were large paintings, not small paintings. They were like at least 6, 8 feet tall and 5 to 7 feet wide. Well, he started making fun of St. Louis, calling it a provincial town. I had sold 4 of the 6 paintings prior to that. Every single person came to me and said, forget it.
Wow.
Not one of them bought the painting. I ended up selling them later, but it was, you have all of these stories with artists. Most of them are fantastic, and most of them are very appreciative of what happens. And this artist, if I won't tell you his name, but he has changed himself.
Oh, we're going to get you
100%.
drunk later and get the name out.
I'll give you the dirt
At our
later.
party,
All right. Okay. Oh.
Ugenchi?
I could ask you this later, but I'll ask you in front of everybody. Since it is a family affair and you've cultivated such a passion for art in your family, I'm curious about the generation before and where you got this intrigue, this intelligence, and this love of art.
Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you something that kind of relates to it. Because right now, my feeling is that I really handle a lot of the 60s through the turn of the century art. But by the same token, once in a while, I find somebody that is spectacular. So I'm over at my daughter's house one night, and sitting in the corner over there is an artist. And by the way, he's an artist that I had never met before. I didn't know his work. But he's known as Kaws, K-A-W-S. His real name is Brian Connolly. And I go over, I talk to him. I had a really good time with him. I meet with him. We spent most of the evening together. I get back to St. Louis. I call up the director of the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, and I tell her about it. She does a show of us, and at the same time, I do a show. And I was thinking about it, because this was really Jeannie's artist. And it's not Jeannie's artist. She's shaking her head no. But the essence of it was that I did a lot through the turn of the century, and Jeannie has now taken over. And in my mind, she's so much better dealer than I ever will be. So that's it. Does that kind of answer the question?
Well, I think you were talking about our backgrounds.
He's
a
a
little bit.
forward-looking man, obviously, right? It's like,
All right.
I will say this about Ronnie's mother was a collector. She was a shopper, and she loved antiques. And so Ronnie grew up in a household where there was a lot of stuff coming in. And his mother had wonderful taste in antiques and furniture, decorative arts. But there was no interest in
Contemporary.
paintings.
No,
His father
nothing.
thought, when Ronnie said he was going to open a gallery, his father just couldn't feature that canvas on a wall could ever sell or grow in value. But eventually he came around to it.
Tom has
And
a question.
my mother loved art. She loved beautiful things, and she collected paintings, but mostly by St. Louis artists. But I always loved the fact that, we had lovely paintings around, and it pushed me into studying art history because this was something that I wanted to learn more about. But basically, we came to it together. And our children grew up with it, and so it was part of the conversation. So it makes sense to me that, Jackie's a designer architect, that Jeannie's a gallerist, and that my oldest daughter, Lynn, is a professor of English literature and writes books and collects art too. So it's gone to this far, and I'm hoping it'll move on.
Tom, you had a question.
You've both been around art all your lives. Even in the Army, you took up an interest in it. You grew up in art homes. Have you ever taken palette and paint in hand and done your own?
You know something? That's the most frustrating thing in the world. I did try it one time, and I failed so miserably that I never did it again. But I'll let Ann talk to you about that.
But it's a good question because writing books about artists, whether they're ceramicists or painters or sculptors or installation artists, whatever, I felt I had to take some lessons and learn. If I was going to write about how it's made and what the technique is, I had to understand it. I could draw a little bit. In fact, most of my high school years in class were spent drawing in the margins instead of listening. But what? Doodling, that's what it was. But I thought they were sort of interesting looking. And I found that I didn't have a skill. I couldn't really get into it, but I wanted to see how it was made. You can't write about an artist's work without having a sense of how it's created. That I think is a good question, a good kind of advice for anyone who wants to write about
There's
art.
someone in the middle.
is there someone in the middle with a question?
Yes, I'm very interested in what Ronnie has to say since I closed a gallery in '04 after 20-some years.
Oh, my.
But I really came today to hear Jan talk about writing children's books. Your children's books are extraordinary.
Oh, thank you.
And I would like to see us have a library of your books here in the Anderson Ranch. And I wonder if perhaps we can't make a deal about that.
I would be very happy. I would be very happy to send a box of all the books on art that I've written to Anderson Ranch.
By the way,
it would
that's
be
more
my
than
honor.
20 books.
Thank you very much.
Hi, well, thank you guys very much for this great speech today. I haven't really been involved in the art world, and just hearing your story and the passion you have about it has been really, really informative for me. So I have a question. Kind of one of the things that we're all hearing about across all the various industries is technology. And so what advice do you have, especially as we think about the next generation and getting people more interested in art and keeping that passion? What are some things that you think that we can do as a society and just as people who have young children to really keep that passion going forward in our society about art?
Well, I'll just give an introduction to you. But I think right now you are in the midst of one of the greatest facilities around, and that's Anderson Ranch. And look at what it does. I mean, it spreads all kinds of art all over the world. And I think that's one of the great things that can happen. And I think more and more it continues to grow and grow.
Well, I agree with that too. And if you walk around the ranch, you see children at the camp. And I hope there's some students in here that come from everywhere where they have not, you think about artists since Impressionism, where you think about the artist as being isolated and working alone. I mean, we know in the Renaissance they had, great salons and studios where artists had other people helping them do work. But since Impressionism, I think it's true that we think of an artist being isolated and on his own. And here there's such a collaborative process. You can work right next to someone on a different project, and then you can discuss and work together. But in answer specifically to your question about children and raising them, I guess we spent a lot of time, and I know that my daughters do too, going to museums with kids and letting them look and maybe having a dialogue with art. What do you see? Don't try and interpret it. Just what do you see? Describe the piece. There are ways to do that. And also making art. Because I think children all have different ways of responding to art. Some like to create, some like to look at it and talk about it philosophically. Some like to really just have a conversation. And I think there are all different ways that you can bring kids into the process. I suppose when you're younger, and I hate the idea that so many art and music classes have been cut in public schools all over the country, because it's not just to be appreciators, but it also, as you were mentioned earlier, someone did, that it improves abstract thinking skills. Mm-hmm. And so what would we do about art? What would we do without it, really, in this world? It's the artists.
To live with art is all we ask.
Yes.
All right.
That's true.
All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, there we are.
Oh, good. Linda.
So when you first started writing, you wrote like young children's, like romance kind of, Judy Blume kind of things. Mm-hmm. Isn't that where you started? Was there an aha moment when you decided to change and write about artists?
The aha moment came when my daughters left home. And there was none of the teenage stories were in my household anymore. And I wanted to continue writing, but what would I write about? And you write about what you know, and what we've been doing for all those years is living with art and looking at art and talking to artists. And I remember, just going back, I think of Richard Serra. He came to St. Louis in the middle 60s, and he was such a risk taker. And he wasn't afraid of being rejected. And I had wanted to write a book. I'd always wanted to write a book, but I was afraid. I was afraid of, being rejected, afraid of not really getting it right. He wasn't worried about that. He was worried about making the work and getting it out there. And so, so for me, even I was at a standstill. I couldn't write another book about a teenager and his or her problems. I just couldn't. It was enough. And so to take that step and start writing books about art, especially when there were no books about, especially contemporary art, it was a matter of being encouraged by an editor and just moving on in a way that was familiar to me as well and challenging. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you so much, Amy and Jan and Ronnie. This has been wonderful. Thank you.